In the last video, we got the spaceship to move around on the screen. The problem is that the space alien spaceship can actually move right off of the screen, so we need to fix that somehow. In our game, the spaceship is going to actually be near the bottom of the screen, and it's just going to move back and forth. The up and down buttons we are not going to use in this game, so we're just going to use the left and right one, and then the A button to shoot as well. So what we're going to have to do is take our code that moves the ship right and left, and we're going to have to do a check to make sure if it is off of the screen, then, or if it's approaching off the screen, then actually don't move it, so that it only butts up against the edge of the screen. So ideally what we would want to do is if we press the button, it would go over, but when it's right at the edge, if you keep pressing it, nothing would happen. That's what we're looking for. So to solve this problem, we're going to use an if statement, but there's another thing that we need to fix first in our code that's going to help us in that, and that's these magical numbers that just sort of magically appear. What the heck does this 8 and the 10 and the 60 mean? So as you know from before, having magical numbers in a program is usually a bad idea. These numbers should be referenced off of a constants file. So I've actually created a constants file here called constants.py, and I'm just saved that to the PyBadge as well. So if you look at my file explorer and you go to CircuitPython, there's the constants.py, and here's the file. So once again, the comment header at the top is the same, and the comment is that this is the screen size for this particular PyBadge is 160 by 128 pixels, and each sprites are 16 by 16. So some constants that we can use are the screen size in the x direction is going to be 160, in the y direction it's 128. Just going to make these bigger. If you remember from our code, we broke the screen into a grid of 16 by 16 pixels, and because it's 160 by 128, that means we have 10 by 8 rows. So that's where these numbers become useful. The sprite size is 16 by 16. Remember, we also had a number that's telling us how fast we're refreshing things at 60 frames per second. And the last thing we're going to be using is this constant called sprite movement speed. So to move our sprite around the screen, at the moment we're moving it just 1 pixel at a time, so it moves 60 pixels per second. We might want to increase or decrease that in our game logic, or we might want to just an easy way to keep it. So at the moment, we're just going to have a constant that holds that so that it's not another magical number. So we're going to use these to replace some of these magical numbers on our program. So the first thing we're going to need is an import statement, and we're going to need to import that file. Then here we can start replacing things. We can use constants dot and go back here and get the exact name, screen grid in the X, and just going to copy this so it's easier. Screen in the Y. Oops, hope that comes back. Okay, I'm going to have to reload that because I accidentally moved off my screen. Let's do that again. And constants dot. Hopefully I won't make the same mistake. There we go. These numbers aren't really magical because remember I'm picking the 5th element and I'm placing it in a certain location. So those we're going to keep. And for constants, I believe it was FPS. Another change we're going to make is, since we don't want our spaceship to move up or down, I'm just going to remove this code. You can't just leave it blank, so we have this reserved word called pass. And now that we know that this works, we're going to do the same things up here as well. So that'll prevent the screen from, or my spaceship from moving up and down, and when we press the other buttons, nothing will happen. So I'm just going to save this now and make sure that we haven't broken our code in any way. So we're going to go back to the Pi badge. Oh, and I did on line 22. Line 22, there's no module called constants. Oh, I put constants twice. That doesn't make sense. There we go. Go back again. Okay, so there's my Pi badge. I can move it left and right, but when I press the up or the down button, nothing actually happens. And when I press the other buttons, now it's not saying anything. So we haven't broken our program. We could move that character down a little bit, but it still goes off the screen. So how do we prevent it from going off the screen? To prevent it going off the screen, what we need to do is, before we move it, we need to do a check to make sure that it's not going to go off the screen on us. So I'm just going to do the left-hand one because it's the easier one. So if the ship's X position becomes less than 0, so I'm going to say greater than 0. So if the ship's position is greater than 0, then it is okay to move it left. Just as an extra check, I'm going to put an else here. Else, so if the spaceship's X position, actually I'm going to say greater than or equal to 0, so that it's allowed to go right up to the edge. If it's not, then I'm just going to take the ship's X position and set it to 0. So what's going to happen is, if we hit the left-hand key, so we hit the left-hand one, it will do a check, and if the spaceship's X position is greater than 0, that means that it's over here somewhere, so it can subtract a little piece. But if it's not greater than or equal to 0, which means it is less than 0, then I just want to move it to 0. So what will happen is, if it moves off the screen, it'll just bounce back, and 60 times a second it'll just keep doing that. So I'm going to save this. And see what happens. So if we move right, that's fine. And if we move left, it is moving left. And there it is. You can see it sort of just bouncing back and forth on the edge of the screen. So that's really helpful. Now we have it so that it won't go off the left-hand side. To prevent it from going off the right-hand side, we have to check if the X position is greater than something. And the thing that it's greater than is the distance of the screen. And we have the distance of the screen. It's this value right here. It's 160 pixels. So we can do the exact same kind of logic up here for the right hand. If ship.x, if that value is less than or equal to this value right here, but instead of typing in 160, I'm going to use the constant. So if it's less than or equal to that value, then it's perfectly okay to move the ship over. If it's past that value, else, then what we're going to do is we're going to take the ship and we're just going to place it right on the edge of the screen here for us. So we're going to grab this and, whoops, the whole thing here. So we just place it right there. So when the right-hand key is pressed, we're going to check the ship's X position, and if it's less than or equal to 160, then we'll move the ship over. If it's not less than 160, that means it's sort of moved off the right-hand side of our screen, then we'll just move it right back to the right-hand side of the screen. So let's see how this works. So here we are back with our little pi badge, and we can move it over to the left and it just sort of hits right to the edge, so that's good. Now when we move it over to the right, oh, it still went off the screen. So what's happening is, the problem is it's stopping right at the edge, but the value that it's checking on our sprite is the complete edge right here. So it's actually doing what it's supposed to, but it's putting it right on the very edge over here because we said 160. So really what we need to do is we need to subtract the distance of our sprite, which we will remember is 16 pixels, and then it should be okay. So let's just, in a horrible fashion, say minus 16, even though we would never really do that. We're going to fix that and change it to a constant value. So we've subtracted 16 off. So now when we move the spaceship over, oh, it went off still. Oh, you'll see what's happening. It sort of vanishes instantly. See how it just vanished? Oop. So the reason we're doing that, that's happening, is this else. Okay, so we also need to put the minus 16 here. So let's see if this works better. So here we are back, and we move it over, and there you go. It now just sticks at the edge, and it's sort of doing the little bouncing thing. And if we move to the right hand or the left hand side, it's doing the same thing. So that's good. We shouldn't have 16 though. We should use our constants. So this is the equivalent of 16. So let's use constant dot, put that in there. So there we go. So that's our new process for figuring out how to make our ship move back and forth. We check it versus the size of the screen, and we only move it when it's within bounds. When it goes out of bounds, we just move it strictly back into the position that it needs to be, and that works fine. So our program now no longer has magic numbers, and we have a way of constraining our spaceship to where it's supposed to be. The only other thing I'm going to play with is this is the X and the Y value, so I would increase this. I want this spaceship at the bottom of the screen. So remember that our screen is 128 pixels in the Y direction, but if we chose to move it 128 down, it would be off the bottom of the screen, so we need to subtract a little. If we just subtracted 16 once, then it would be right at the bottom of the screen. I'd like a little space, so I'm actually going to subtract this value twice. So I'm going to grab this. So there's our value, and then I'm going to subtract. Just going to put it in brackets, 2 times, and it's going to be this value. So the x value I kept the same, the middle of the screen, and then I said move to the very bottom, but then subtract a little bit, and what I want to subtract is the size of the spaceship twice so that it just moves up a little bit, the size of the spaceship. Actually, there will be a space. Let's replace that and see where it shows up. So there you go. Now it's at the bottom of the screen, but there's a little space at the bottom that you can see things go by, and then we have our spaceship. So that's the new starting position for our spaceship. It can move left, it can move right, and it doesn't come off of the screen, so we're all set to go. Next thing we need to do is have an alien actually show up, and then we'd like to actually shoot at the alien by pressing on the A button.